Okay, good morning. I think that we will begin our program. We try to keep things on track at the Lubar Center and Law School, or at least not to go off the rails first thing. So, good morning and welcome to Eckstein Hall and Marquette University Law School. My name is Joseph Kearney, and it is a privilege for me as Dean of the Law School to greet you this morning. I want to provide a short introduction to today's program, Resolving the Tension Between Agriculture and Water Quality in Wisconsin. Many of you are familiar with the general work of our Lubar Center for Public Policy Research and Civic Education, led by our alum and former judge, Derek Mosley. Through our Lubar Center and in our Lubar Center, as we are now, we offer programs that engage not just the law school and the rest of Marquette University, but interested citizens in this region more generally. These programs encompass many different subjects or themes. I will not speak to all of them, but I do want to begin our program by noting a few of our interests that together helped inspire our focus on today's topic. First, the law school has a particular and now long-standing top interest or thematic focus in all things water. More than 15 years ago, in 2009, we launched a new curriculum in water law aimed at supporting Milwaukee's commitment to becoming a global leader in water research and policy. Then, almost a decade ago, inspired by our then new university president, Michael Lovell, we expanded our effort. In particular, we brought aboard Professor Dave Strifling, a Marquette engineer and Marquette lawyer, to lead an expanded water law and policy initiative. Our effort has been to establish the law school and, more broadly, Marquette University as a center for the study, exploration, and discussion of water issues. Since his appointment, Professor Strifling has moved to connect us with others holding similar interests, both inside and outside Marquette University. For example, the Water Law and Policy Initiative has led or participated in more than a dozen grant-funded projects, many of them interdisciplinary in nature, allowing us to provide cutting-edge research opportunities to more than 50 of our law students. We have also expanded our water curriculum at the law school to include new courses and new faculty, and some of our law graduates have taken positions in the profession related to the water sector. Yet the particular reason that we are here today in the Lubar Center is that still another part of the mission of the Water Law and Policy Initiative is public education. Toward that end, in recent years, Professor Strifling has led us in organizing and hosting numerous water-related events here at the Lubar Center. These include conversations and conferences about the Great Lakes Compact, lead laterals and drinking water, water policy in the Chicago megacity, the economic impacts of Milwaukee's focus on water technologies, federal-state relationships in environmental regulation, environmental justice, water reuse, and any number of other topics. This interest in taking up the world's water problems extends beyond the law school to Marquette University more generally. We have teamed with university colleagues in many other disciplines to pursue a variety of water-related projects. Even now, for example, our colleagues in Marquette's Opus College of Engineering are working on the problem of phosphorus and other nutrients in our waters, which is very germane to our focus today. Moving beyond Marquette, we recognize, even here in Milwaukee, that the interplay between agriculture and water quality is important to the future of our state. Wisconsin is known for its invaluable array of water resources on the one hand, and its heritage as an agricultural powerhouse on the other. These two aspects of the state's identity can be in tension with one another. You may be aware that the federal government's most recent National Water Quality Assessment concluded that agricultural runoff and the like are the leading cause of adverse water quality impacts on rivers and streams, and the third leading cause of such impacts on lakes. So our immediate motivation for hosting today's event is to help illuminate a path forward for agriculture and water to coexist well. Our expert in these matters is my colleague, Professor David Strifling, director of our Water Law and Policy Initiative. He is, as I have said, a Marquette engineer and a Marquette lawyer of greater immediate interest. He is the person who will lead us through this program. Welcome to him in a sense, and certainly welcome to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Kearney. Welcome, everyone. We're very glad all of you are here. We have an exciting group of guests here today to offer a variety of perspectives on the issues in front of us. Up first, our keynote speaker this morning is Dr. Marin Skidmore of the Department of Agricultural and Consumer Economics at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Dr. Skidmore is an applied economist studying the interactions among policy, agriculture, and the environment, a perfect mix for our conversation here today. Even better, she has Wisconsin connections. She's a Wisconsin native, and she received her PhD in agricultural and applied economics from the University of Wisconsin. She also recently published the results of her team's Wisconsin-based study on the effectiveness of local regulations on non-point source pollution based on evidence from Wisconsin dairy farms, which will be the subject of her presentation this morning. After Dr. Skidmore's presentation, we'll take a short break and then hear from a panel that includes guests from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, the Wisconsin Farm Bureau, and Clean Wisconsin. So with that as prologue, let me conclude the introductions here and yield the floor to Dr. Skidmore for an engaging discussion of local policy, agriculture, and water quality. I ask you to hold your questions until the end of her presentation, and to please join me now in welcoming Marin Skidmore to Marquette Law School.
All right. Thank you so much, Dean Kearney and Professor Strifling, for those wonderful introductions. As they said, I am a native of Wisconsin. I'm from Colgate up in Washington County, so it is truly a delight to be back home and speaking with all of you about non-point source pollution as it pertains to Wisconsin. Just wanted to make sure before we get too far that we're all on the same page about exactly what non-point source pollution means and why it is an ongoing conversation with regards to policy. As the name suggests, non-point source pollution is pollution that does not emanate from one single point in space. The point of contrast would be a municipal wastewater treatment plant, where you have one pipe that emits effluent, and you can measure and know exactly how much effluent is coming from that firm. In the case of non-point source pollution, we can think about agriculture, and we have manure and fertilizer applications happening across broad landscapes. Some of that manure and fertilizer may run off and leave the fields if it is perhaps exposed to a heavy rainfall event or rainfall that's ill-timed, and so the crop does not take up the nutrients and use them for its growth, right? And when that happens, then we have So when that happens, that is the impetus for runoff of manure, of fertilizer, from these broad landscapes to the surface water. Like I said, in contrast, we have the point source issue, and we have one major federal policy that governs point source pollution in the United States. It is the Clean Water Act. It is 50 years old, over 50 years old, and we have broad evidence that the Clean Water Act was effective. This is a graph of the proportion of our surface waters in the United States that were not fishable. And we can see that that proportion fell by half. And this and a number of papers show that we can really attribute much of the improvement in our surface waters to the Clean Water Act. That being said, the Clean Water Act was extraordinarily expensive. We spent over $1 trillion on the Clean Water Act, and much of that money went to municipal and industrial sources of pollution. Very little of the money went to non-point source pollution, and the money that did went to supportive activities, because non-point or agriculture is, with essentially the exception of CAFOs, is outside of the regulatory arm of the Clean Water Act. And this is because when it comes to non-point source pollution, how can we track exactly the amount of pollution or of runoff that comes from a single farm? We don't have a reliable way to map and quantify the amount of pollution coming from one single farm. And in economics, we like these elegant market-based instruments where we send a firm a bill, either in the form of taxes or cap and trade, that is proportional to the amount of pollution they generated. Right? But how would we say this dairy farm generated exactly this amount of pollution, therefore here's their bill proportional to their source of pollution? We're just not there on the science. There are so many factors, one of them being weather, that are unpredictable. And so we're getting, of course, better all the time at modeling this, but we're really still not at the point yet where I think that policymakers and society and we economists can reliably say, this is how much one farm generates, therefore we are ready to take on these more strict policies like we've seen through the Clean Water Act. That being said, we have still an ongoing challenge that we're in the dairy state. Last I looked, and the latest estimate is that agriculture contributes $50 billion to Wisconsin's economy. There's also a cultural value, I would argue, to the dairy industry in Wisconsin. So we have this enormously valuable industry, and we also have water pollution issues, right? Many of you have probably tried to go to the lake in the summer, and you can't get in the water because there's a blue-green algae outbreak, right? So this is both just a personal day-to-day recreation problem. There's evidence that this is a health problem. We have nitrate leaching to groundwater, and there are enormous human health costs to that. And so this is an ongoing policy conversation. How do we manage the enormous nutrient output coming from dairy production in a way that is, maintaining this important industry while also maintaining and protecting our natural resources? One of the things, I love a lot of things about Wisconsin, but one of the things that I really love about Wisconsin is that Wisconsin is innovative. We have tried, I say we, I'm not a policymaker, but our policymakers and our agencies have tried a lot of innovative things that are not happening in other states. And I spend my time in Illinois now. I talk to them about some of these projects, and they're really interested because we should not take for granted that Wisconsin is really willing to try new experiments to tackle the non-point source problem. So some of the examples are our farmer-led watershed groups, building these bottom-up initiatives, paying farmers to take initiatives for their own to improve water quality. The Farmland Preservation Program, which gives farmers a per-acre subsidy to maintain land in farmland, but also requires that they develop nutrient management plans. They steward the land. The Wisconsin Water Quality Trading program, which allows those point source polluters to pay non-point to trade for offsets. And then this is sort of federally led, but was carried out by a lot of our county conservation districts. So I'll put this in the bundle of Wisconsin-led initiatives. That we were the site of the first USDA-led demonstration farm networks. Many of these papers are working papers, so I can't guarantee that you'll find all of them on the internet, but this is a really active place of research, and most of these papers are finding that these initiatives are having positive impact on the environment. So, but today we are going to talk about one other policy experiment, if you will, which is that in Wisconsin, the state government has delegated the option to county governments to regulate, to enforce manure management regulation. This is, we were at the time of this paper being written, the first state to actually roll this out. But many other states have written into their legislation the option to delegate to counties. All right. So our research question today is, what happened when counties got involved in enforcing local manure management ordinances? What happened to surface water quality? And then within that, we're going to look at the different aspects of manure management regulation and ask which of them really were the source of the impact on water quality. All right. So the quick overview on the manure policy environment in Wisconsin. All agricultural production in the state is subject to state code, NR 151. So everything in NR 151 is the law of the land in the entire state. The state agencies can enforce NR 151 through lawsuits. Right? So this work was done in cooperation, with enormous support from DNR, from DATCAP, and from our county conservation departments. And what I was told, and you all might know something about this, being lawyers, I was told that lawsuits are enormously expensive, and they take a while to get through the full process. And so what I was told by folks at DNR, at DATCAP, is that generally you use the lawsuit hammer for the most egregious violations. Right? You have a case where there's a very visible manure spill and fish kill in local streams. That would be a case that rises to the level of a lawsuit. But there's also this chronic drip of smaller violations happening across the state that the DNR doesn't necessarily have all of the resources to address every single one of those smaller violations. So this is where our counties sort of stepped in, and were given the ability to step in, and then some of them chose to. If a county writes into their local ordinance that this part of NR 151 is in their local ordinance, then they get to wear not only the supportive cost-sharing hat, they also get to wear the enforcement hat. So when a county becomes aware of a violation, the first thing they'll do is they'll approach the farmer and they'll say, this is, in violation of this part of our local ordinance. We want you to get in compliance, and we in the state are going to offer you cost sharing. We'll foot some of the bill to bring you into compliance. And then, ideally, the farmer accepts that cost sharing, they take steps, and they're in compliance, and everything ends there. But as a backstop, the counties have the ability to issue fines if there's continued noncompliance. And of course, we still have the backstop of the DNR, DOJ, DATCAP coming in with a lawsuit, right? So when I think about what happened when counties were delegated and became involved in enforcement, I think of this not as a substitute to the state agencies or as a substitute to the existing enforcement, but rather as a complement or as an addition, right? We're using, now we have multiple levers to pull. We still have the big lever, but ideally we have this local group, county boards, that probably know the farmers, and they have more boots on the ground, more staff to go out and be aware of smaller violations and step in before they become those egregious cases. The interesting thing about this from a hydrology perspective is that our counties make decisions not only for their borders and for their constituents, but they make decisions beyond their borders because water does not care about county boundaries, right? So this is a map of our watersheds, Huck 8s, overlaid with our county boundaries. And if we pick on Dane County is actually in 4 watersheds, right? So the actions that happen in Dane County can have an influence out to the Mississippi and very nearly over here to Lake Michigan, right? And so you have these local county boards making decisions that can influence not only their own water quality, but also influence their neighbors. All right, so we are going to focus on manure management ordinances. We had enormous support from the county conservation departments. They provided to us every ordinance back to 2008. Some counties gave us ordinances far beyond that, back to the 90s. They were pulling out paper and scanning it. I truly cannot emphasize enough how helpful they were. But we were able to say, back to 2008, we know what was in a manure management ordinance in every county in Wisconsin. This is helpful because we had a big NR 151 update in 2010, and so we wanted to sort of be able to focus on the point from that update forward to have consistency at the state level. Like I said, this was really in collaboration with the county conservation departments, but also with the state agencies. So I had conversations with the non-point director at DNR at the time and a number of staff at DNR and DATCAP to understand what did they think mattered in the manure management ordinances. Because there's a lot in these ordinances, and maybe all of it is not really relevant or not going to be the biggest impact. So historically, manure management ordinances at the county level were focused on storage construction and permitting. When you build a new manure storage facility, you apply to the county for a permit, and this was the main point of interaction between dairy farmers and the counties. And of course, so we documented the requirements for obtaining new permits. We also documented the structure of cost, both the cost of getting the permit and the fines if you were found to be out of compliance. But what had been happening more recently is that many counties were adding into their ordinances a portion of NR 151 that was focused on manure spreading standards and prohibitions, giving themselves the ability to intercede when they were finding violations on these standards and prohibitions, and getting more involved in the day-to-day rather than just on the construction and permitting side. So this is the set of standards and prohibitions that we documented and put in our data set. The first is the requirement that all farms must have a nutrient management plan. A nutrient management plan is exactly what the name suggests. It is a plan for how and when and at what rate you are going to apply nutrients to a crop field. So when a farmer develops a nutrient management plan, it's quite a sophisticated process. First, they need to test their soil, because soil already has, in many cases, phosphorus bonded to that soil. So perhaps your crop actually needs less phosphorus than the agronomy textbooks might say, because there's already phosphorus in the soil. Second, especially if you're spreading manure, you need to test that manure, because manure is different than chemical fertilizer, which comes with a perfectly estimated and maintained ratio of the nutrients. So you need to know what is the balance of nutrients that are available in your manure. Third, you pull out the agronomy textbook and you figure out what crop am I planting in this field, and what are the requirements of that crop in terms of the nutrients, and when do they need it. Right? All of this is leading to an optimization of applying exactly the right amount of nutrients when the crop needs it. And ideally, once you optimize that, once you get just as many nutrients as the crop needs when it needs it, you can really dramatically reduce the runoff, right? Because a lot of runoff, we would think, comes from over-application, of application in excess of what the crop needs, and the nutrients being left over, vulnerable to rainfall and runoff. So as a spoiler, we're going to see that these nutrient management plans really were what we saw have short-term impact on water quality in our study. There's also, in some counties, they write in that nutrient management plans must be in compliance with a federal standard for nutrient management plans, 590. it seems like most nutrient management plans that's good practice, and so it's not really binding to say that it needs to be up to fine 90. Okay. But then we looked at a set of standards that are also in NR 151.02 to .06, and we found that in all cases, I believe except one, counties rolled out these standards in the same setup. So if a county wanted to dip its toe in to the standards, they would implement the manure storage facility standard. If they were moving farther, they would implement the clean water diversion and sheet reel wind erosion standard. And if they were going for the whole hog, that would mean that they were adding the tillage setback, phosphorus index, and processed wastewater standards. There's also a set of prohibitions. These prohibitions in NR 151.08 say that there may be no overflow of storage facilities, no unconfined manure pile in a water quality management area, no direct runoff of feedlot or stored manure into waters of the state, and no unlimited access by livestock to the waters of the state when high animal concentration prevents adequate vegetative cover. These seem like practical, just good practice standards to me. The last thing that we are seeing counties doing right now, I say right now, this study wrapped up a couple of years ago, but what we were seeing as the cutting edge at that point was previously, as I said, counties were involved in storage construction and permitting. And so you would apply for the permit once and then carry on your way, and you didn't need to come back and talk to the county unless you did some sort of renovation or a new construction. Some counties, for example, Sauk County, are adding a certificate of use that says you need a certificate of use to continue using that storage facility, which requires that you come back and interact with the county, I believe in the case of Sauk, every 5 years, right? So you have those consistent touch points with your county conservation department. And again, with this idea that they're local and they're, have more staff, this can be a really helpful point to keep that relationship. That being said, this was very new at the time of our study. We didn't really have a lot to study. Okay. So we are going to be looking, like I said, at the variation between the number of counties that had certain ordinance aspects in 2010, and then looking at the rollout as more counties signed in aspects of NR 151 into their ordinances over the decade. So here on the left, we have in light blue the counties that wrote in their ordinance that all farms needed a nutrient management plan. Some of the usual suspects: Door County, Dane County, right? But what we see is by 2010, like Sauk and Iowa County have gotten involved, as well as Dane County. Or up here, we have La Crosse and Trempealeau and Buffalo getting involved. Okay? So we get more counties over the years adding these ordinances. We did not see any retractions. No ordinances took things out over our period. The thing that's nice for us is that it's not a simple formula where the places with more cows have stricter ordinances. We have variation across space. So every dot here is a licensed milk producer. We obtained the addresses of all of the licensed milk producers from DATCAP, and we can see that there are places with a lot of dairy production that don't require nutrient management plans, and places with very little dairy production that do, right? So that's a nice little variation for us across space. We also include the 2018 Silurian bedrock rule that affected the 16 counties on the East Coast, if you will, that have Silurian bedrock. So if you don't know, Silurian bedrock is what we're on here, and it's a fractured bedrock, which means that whatever happens on the soil's surface gets to the groundwater really quickly. And so with that, the state stepped in and said, this is a really, really vulnerable place. And so we're going to require nutrient management plans for all spreading on all fields that have Silurian bedrock within these counties. And if you have less than 2 feet of soil above the bedrock, it was a complete ban on any spreading, and then the requirements decreased in stringency as the bedrock was lower, as the soil was deeper. Okay. We measure the impact empirically, which means we need quite a bit of data. We have measures of filtered ammonia and total phosphorus from the water quality portal. The water quality portal pulls in all of the readings from USGS, EPA, from Wisconsin DNR, and puts them in a mostly usable, you need to do some cleaning, but mostly usable format. So we pulled all of those readings of surface water from Wisconsin over the decade. Filtered ammonia is a proxy, it's a signal for what's happening to total nitrogen in the system. Hopefully none of you are going to quiz me on the nitrogen cycle, but essentially it's an imperfect measure, but it is the most common way that nitrogen is being measured in our surface water systems. So that's what we relied on. Like I said, DATCAP generously, well, it is public information, but they really helped in formatting the licensed milk producer addresses and operating dates in Wisconsin for us over that period. ZACRAF and the DNR helped us in getting the CAFO permit locations and timing. Then we want to control for other things that affect water quality, and so we controlled for precipitation and temperature. We controlled for the point source pollution, right? We don't want to over-attribute water pollution to agriculture by leaving out the contribution of point sources. So we add in those NIPDES permits from EPA. And then we control for the total area of cropland in the watershed. So because we are going to study this with a multiple linear regression. So on the left-hand side, this is our dependent variable. We are curious about what is the current nutrient concentration in one of those HUC-8s in a given year, in a given month. Okay. So we take all the water quality readings and we aggregate them to a HUC-8, a watershed. This is the map you saw before. We use these because these are drainage basins. So when we want to think about the spatial unit where the activity on the land is affecting that region, we want to think about hydrological units, or HUC-8s. We aggregate to the monthly level in our primary specification because this avoids the instance where, for example, let's say they're sampling the Yahara every single day, and they're only sampling Lake Winnebago once a month, right? Well, we don't think that the Yahara is necessarily 31 times more important than Lake Winnebago, and so we just average this to the month. Then our independent variable, our variable of interest, is the ordinance environment. And because we know we know where the farms are located, we can place them in a county and within a watershed. And so we can, within the watershed, add up all of the dairy farms that were subject to a county ordinance, right? And this is our variable of interest that we're interested in. Then we control for other things that explain our dependent variable, things like the weather, things about like the total number of farms and the CAFOs and the point source pollution. Then we use a set of variables that we call fixed effects. Okay? So the first fixed effect is our HUC-8 fixed effect. This controls for everything that is constant within the HUC-8 across time. So think bedrock type, think soil depth, think slope. Right? This is essentially saying that Kewanee County is different than Rock County, and it's always different in this fixed way, and so we're just sucking all of that up in the fixed effect. Then we have our year fixed effects. This controls for things that affected the whole state in a given year. So things like a change in the state level administration or a change in the federal administration that might have brought on activity that affected water quality other than these ordinances. We have month fixed effects. This controls for seasonality and water quality. So for example, water quality in March and April is usually quite poor as we get big snow melts and runoff in that point. So we wouldn't want to attribute or to overemphasize a water quality reading in March being very bad if that Hug 8 sampled in March rather than July, when over-attribute that to the ordinance when some of it is just seasonal variation. Okay. All right, so this is the graph of our coefficients. So these are the point estimates, and the bars are our 95% confidence intervals. So what you'll notice is that the vast majority of these bars intersect the 0. That means we find no effect. Okay? Where we do find a negative and significant effect in the same year, so this is asking how does today's ordinance affect water quality today, is in the case of nutrient management planning and ammonia, and we find very small but very precise negative effects for the Silurian bedrock regulation, which, if you'll recall, also requires nutrient management plans. If we look 3 years on, we see still those negative and significant coefficients on nutrient management planning, but now not just for ammonia, also for phosphorus. Okay. So we interpret this lag to get to see effects on phosphorus to the presence of legacy phosphorus. So phosphorus, like I said, it binds to soil. It stays in our surface water systems for decades, if not centuries. So it's not surprising to me that when you optimize nutrient spreading, the first thing that you would see responding is nitrogen, and that we see promising evidence that phosphorus also declines, but it takes a little longer, and the effects are more modest. And we still see a lot of things just not having an effect in the short run. Okay, so why? Oh, we test this a lot of other ways, and we find the same results and same conclusions. One thing that is useful for giving us comfort in our models is that we test for and don't see that counties were implementing stricter ordinances because their water quality was worsening relative to their neighbors. We spoke to many county cons, and what I learned is that local politics is fascinating, and every county had a different story for why they wrote a new ordinance, right? So there was not a consistent story of our water quality was getting worse, and so we implemented the ordinance. There were just these local politicking reasons, which is good for reassuring us that we're picking up on the effect of the ordinances. So, to conclude, we saw in that graph that increasing the number of standards, adding in the manure management prohibitions, we did not detect a significant effect on water quality in the short run, up to 3 years. Why might that be? Okay, first, there are two explanations that have to do with behavior. So first, it might be that the things that were implemented weren't changing binding constraints. So here, my hypothesis is that those manure spreading prohibitions are good sense. Farmers are stewards of the land. This isn't changing a binding constraint. They understand you should not apply manure to the waters of the state, right? So adding that to a county ordinance, by and large, does not affect behavior because it's not a binding constraint. It also could be that it's not affecting behavior because though counties, adding in county enforcement adds in additional human resources, it still might not be enough human resources to meet the full need, right? So we might still be in an environment with low enforcement where we're still looking at quasi-voluntary compliance. I did hear stories from folks who have been advising counties who said they really advise counties against going for all 6 at once for exactly this reason, right? Because the concern is you do too much too fast and you're simply not ready, right? And so the ordinances are stricter in word only, but not in practice, right? So those are 2 reasons that we might not see an effect for many of the standards and prohibitions. No behavioral change. The other reason might be that there was a behavioral change, but not an ecological change, because these systems take a very long time to change, right? And we cannot expect our water quality to improve overnight. I think we'll probably hear about the nutrient loss reduction strategy and how slowly these really expansive efforts have been moving the needle on water quality. This is not just a Wisconsin issue. Illinois missed its targets. Iowa missed its targets. Water quality is really slow to improve. The bright spot, though, the happy conclusions are that we saw significant improvement in water quality when nutrient management requirements were delegated to county conservation departments. My explanation for this is that it's quite easy to verify if a farm has a nutrient management plan. It is very hard to verify if they are implementing it, but it has been described to me that developing a nutrient management plan can be a light bulb moment, right? It's asking someone, especially in the case of dairy farmers, for whom nutrients are typically an output, to then sit back and plan how to optimize them as an input, right? And so this can be even just the development can really help change behavior in the very near term, reduce the number of nutrients on the ground in those vulnerable positions. The other reason that this is, I think, promising is that developing nutrient management plans can, in theory, be good for the environment, and it can, in theory, be good for a farmer's bottom line, right? It costs money and time to develop it, so I don't want to underrate that. Like I said, there's soil testing, there's manure testing. Many farms pay a certified agronomist to do this, so there's a cost involved. The state, though, was involved in cost sharing for developing nutrient management plans at this time. So in theory, win-win for both farmers and the environment. We also saw significant improvement in water quality with the Silurian bedrock rule change. Want to be cautious there. Those counties are very specific, so we can't conclude that you can roll out these standards to the rest of the state and it would do the same thing. We don't want to extrapolate too far there. And the conclusion that I come to is that we need all of the tools in the toolkit. We need more members of the team, right? And so we saw that when you get local groups involved in monitoring and enforcement, local groups who have local knowledge, who have relationships with the agricultural community, perhaps because they're a part of the agricultural community, then we can see improvements in water quality. And like I said, we really want to think about the instances where local knowledge and relationships matters, or where those quick responses, right, where we can catch the small violations before they become catastrophes. Those are the places where we think about how do we get local folks on board. So with that, thank you. I do also want to thank the Wisconsin Dairy Innovation Hub. They funded this, and there's my email. So looking forward to questions.
I think we have time for just maybe one or two quick questions. Hillary is going to come around with the microphone. If you can raise your hand if you have a question. Got one in the front.
Hi. What's going on in Ozaukee County and Washington County as far as these nutrient plans?
Washington County, at the time that we did this, I paid attention because it's my home county, had not added, they weren't taking a really active role at the time. So that was the state of it in 2020. I don't remember with Ozaukee County. I apologize. Lots of rules about horse management in Washington County, though, which makes sense for any of you who know there. Yeah, so it was a unique, like I said, I read that one since I'm from there. It was sort of unique. Yeah.
Thank you for an excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Did any of the counties include some kind of nutrient removal program, something under the umbrella of natural treatment systems as a vehicle for stripping out the nitrogen and phosphorus?
That's a great question. I do not know the answer. That was beyond the scope of what we looked at. Certainly I know that while I was there in Dane County, they were taking on some of that activity, but beyond that I can't say, sorry.
So I think we're going to cut it off there. You're welcome to approach Dr. Skidmore with questions during the break. Thank you very much for an outstanding talk. Okay, I think we're going to get started and get back on track here. If I could have your attention, we'll get started with the panel conversation. To continue our event, I'd like to introduce our next guest to react to what we've heard so far and also to provide insight on how we can resolve the tension between agriculture and water quality. So joining me here at the table are first from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, Cheryl Heilman, Chief Legal Counsel, and also a couple down, Brian Weigel, who is the Deputy Administrator for the Department of External Services. In between Cheryl and Brian is from the Wisconsin Farm Bureau, Jason Munyaini, Executive Director of Governmental Relations. And finally, down at the far end from me is from Clean Wisconsin, Sarah Walling, who is the Director of the Water and Agriculture Program there. So please join me in welcoming these folks. Okay, so let's talk about the relationship first, just in terms of setting the table between agriculture, agricultural practices, runoff, and water quality degradation, nutrient management, and manure management. What are some of the key issues to keep in mind when we're talking about that? Brian, do you want to start with that?
Thank you. Dr. Skidmore really set the stage for us today, I think, in talking about, in part, manure versus commercial fertilizer. When you were talking about, in particular, the Silurian bedrock performance standards, that was a good experiment, really, in some ways, where there has been a shift in that particular area from primarily manure to commercial fertilizer use, especially when there's shallow depth to bedrock. There's been some ramifications of that, and it's too early to tell long-term what they may be, but some indications are there that these shifts to commercial fertilizer are important. They're seen in the surface water, but we need to understand it more. We need to understand and study the ramifications towards groundwater quality as well. So that's what I would say is one area of interest, more specifically in the Silurian area, manure versus commercial fertilizer.
Sarah, do you want to weigh in on that?
Well, nutrient management is really the foundation for what farmers rely on the daily, whether they call it nutrient management planning or the 4 Rs. There's a number of different ways that agricultural producers and agencies that oversee the actions of farmers and the crop management interact. And so it's a foundation, it's a behavior, it's a decision-making process that is undertaken on the daily on agricultural operations of all sorts. So today and the talk prior to this talked a lot about livestock operations, but certainly row crop farmers are not immune to the issues relative to nutrient runoff and losses both to groundwater and surface water. So that's also something worth keeping in mind in this discussion. Well, a lot of the data was covering nutrient management as it relates to livestock. It's a concept that applies fully to all agriculture operation types in the state, not just livestock.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for being here. And I would be remiss if I didn't start by saying Happy National Ag Day. Yeah. It's National Ag Day today. It's a big day for us. But my work at Farm Bureau, and I appreciate Dr. Skidmore's presentation because it was kind of a catalog of all of the work that I've been doing when I was in the legislature, as well as my time here at Farm Bureau. And there's not a day that goes by that we're not engaged in water in some capacity. I think Brian can attest to that for sure. But we are in a position of transition in agriculture. that I think is really positive. I think that you have a lot of our farmers seeing opportunities on-farm conservation as an opportunity rather than where we've seen it in years past as people who've been in traditional agricultural practices starting to look and shift. And I really think that some of the work that we've been doing on the producer-led side of things, these incentive-based programs, these peer-to-peer relationships have really built an incredible thing. And I believe that Wisconsin agriculture is a national leader in on-farm conservation. I think that goes to Dr. Skidmore's presentation on some of the unique things that we've done. And we'll dive in a little bit deeper into some of the programs that I've been directly related to on nitrate optimization, on nutrient management planning, on our water quality trading clearinghouse, our producer-led groups. I mean, one of the things that I'm excited about is that program, which has served as kind of the foundation of peer-to-peer relationships in agriculture on conservation practices. We just passed a bill last year that Farm Bureau, all of our agricultural community was in support of, that's now going to allow these peer-to-peer organizations, these producer-led groups, to start working in adjacent watersheds so we don't have to recreate the wheel with the 47 organizations that we already have. So I see what we're doing right now in agriculture is this opportunity that people are taking a real close look at and incorporating into their farming practices as a way to improve water quality, but also as an opportunity to improve our bottom line. And if we can really clean up some of the challenges that farmers might be facing with additional regulations and proprietary business information, I think that there's a great win-win that we talked about earlier for Wisconsin agriculture.
Cheryl, can you talk about some of the laws and regulations that address water quality and agriculture and whether they're effective and what some of the potential reforms might be if DNR is looking at anything along those lines?
In just a few short minutes, I will say that DNR's focus, and one of the reasons we're really happy to be here is on protecting water quality, and that happens in the agricultural sector. It also happens in the municipal and the industrial sector, and it happens, based on human activity, so the things that all of us do. I think the professor did a good job at outlining kind of the laws that apply specifically to agriculture today. We have the WPDS, or the Clean Water Act program, that applies to CAFOs and that requires permit and compliance with not only the permit, but some of the regulatory provisions that we've put into effect that are mandated for CAFOs, for large farms. But we also have regulations, and a lot of the focus of her talk was on NR 151 and small and medium farms and the requirements that apply to them. And I think one of the things that I would point out as a challenge is that, you saw the map that had nutrient management plans for some farms, but certainly not all in Wisconsin. And I think part of the reason for that is actually financial. So, for small and medium farms, the department needs to offer cost share, or the counties need to offer cost share for practices to make them economic for farmers. And I think that's, something that is something our policymakers have to kind of think about. And also, the other challenge, I think, when you talk about what things we should do going forward, I think we should have more forums like this, because it's a combination of what will work for farmers and have farm support and allow them to be economically successful and sustainable, and also what the environmental groups and people who live and are affected by agriculture think should happen.
Anyone else want to weigh in on the legal structure or framework?
I have one other thing.
Oh, please.
So one other thing that she also talked about was water quality trading. And one of the ways that the law supports offering incentives to farmers is through water quality trading program. And I know that Jason was involved in helping to establish a clearinghouse to facilitate more trading. And where it's occurred in Wisconsin, it has been very effective. And the concept of trading is simply that it pairs someone who's an industrial or a municipal discharger with a non-point source, and that ordinarily is a farmer or farmers in a watershed. And payments are made to farmers that help them incentivize to do practices that then reduce pollution that's to a common waterway, where the industrial or the municipal discharger is also contributing pollutants, and they can offset some of that through non-point practices.
I'm glad you brought that up. When I saw the picture of the farm that Dr. Skidmore had in her slide deck, I was like, "Oh, that's a perfect example for a water quality trade right there."
Mm-hmm. It is. It is.
So the point source has to reduce phosphorus discharges in its permit, let's say, and doesn't want to spend all the money that would be required to do that. It would be much more economical, let's say, to pay a farmer to install some best management practice to reduce phosphorus from the farm discharging to the same waterway. And it's a win-win for everybody. Is that basically the idea?
Yep, that's basically the idea. And there's a little bit of a ratio built into the trading concept so that we usually actually get even a little bit more benefit than we otherwise would get if just the point source discharger met their permit limits.
Sarah, can you talk a little bit about the role of advocacy groups in this whole process and what Clean Wisconsin does to make things better?
Sure. So at Clean Wisconsin, we are a statewide environmental organization with 20,000 plus members strong. And we've been working with agriculture and often in a very combative way up until about 5 to 10 years ago, really. Getting involved in lawsuits associated with manure spills and fish kills and whatnot, enforcing on permits and that type of a really combative situation. Recognizing at some point in time, and certainly prior to my joining the organization 3 years ago, there's a recognition that we can continue to do, have these expensive lawsuits and go after one farm at a time, but that it really wasn't incentivizing the larger scale change that we need to see to actually achieve the water quality goals that we all have for ourselves and our state. So, we've taken a different and more cooperative approach. Where I came from the Department of Agriculture prior to joining the nonprofit sector about 3 years ago. And one of the things that I got to do when I was there was set up the producer-led watershed protection grant program itself. And that was an extremely exciting time in our state's environmental journey, I would say, because it really was a combination of working together with the Farm Bureau and other agricultural coalition organizations to recognize that there's a lot of farmers out there who are very interested in doing what they can on their operations to change the impacts that they're having on the water quality situation in their neighborhoods and wanted to amplify that message. It has done exactly that. And so what I see and our role for environmental organizations is helping to bridge some of this gap in understanding between the challenges that agricultural producers are faced on the daily with making decisions on manure application, crops that they're going to grow, volatile markets that they have absolutely zero control over, relatively speaking, for the price point that they get for the commodity they're producing. So they don't have the ability to take and implement a best management practice that ultimately costs money for them to do and translate that into what we pay for a gallon of milk, for instance. Because of that lack of direct connection between price points and what the input costs are, if you will, to be a more sustainable operation, there's a lot of understanding that I think needs to be gained across organizations such as mine, agricultural organizations, and certainly the general public to really understand how these interactions work and to be able to help amplify and support farmers who are interested in doing more than what the status quo requires of them currently.
And Jason, same question for you from the Farm Bureau's perspective.
So just a quick thing about Farm Bureau. So Wisconsin Farm Bureau Federation is actually a federation of county farm bureaus. That's really where we drive our power and impetus to be the state's largest agricultural advocacy organization. With over 50,000 members and federated into 61 county farm bureaus. A couple of those have multiple counties, so we're at 65 total counties in the state. We are, one of the state's leading voices on agricultural issues. One of the roles I also serve, in addition to being the lobbyist for Farm Bureau, is I'm the chair of the Wisconsin Ag Coalition, which is 30 organizations that represent almost every capacity of production scale agriculture. Our commodity organizations like pork and cattlemen's, corn, some of our processing organizations like the cheesemakers and Midwest Food Products Association do a lot of canned and frozen vegetable products. And even into some of our agribusinesses with the Wisconsin Agribusiness Association, our biofuels, biodiesel associations. So we kind of work as a united front, taking the memberships that we have all across the states, the businesses, the small family farms, the large family farms, and kind of try to present a united front and a consistent voice. It's a very inclusive organization that we have, but what we really need is what we really rely on is our farmer members, that community support, those community farm bureaus, as the people to provide us with information in Madison and in the state capitol with what's happening on the farm. It's really encouraging to see so many of those organizations with Farm Bureau and others kind of take on this moniker of supporting increased water quality improvements. The Silurian bedrock requirements, you might at first thought said, well, that seems like something farmers might be against. No, we were on the forefront of leading on that charge to make sure that those were implemented in a way that supported agricultural producers, but also were implemented so that those improvements to water quality were included. I mean, days like today on National Ag Day is an opportunity for us to share that story. And the story that we like to share is not only that Wisconsin farmers are a national leader in on-farm conservation, but also that farmers are the original environmentalists. Why you see programs like the producer-led watershed groups having such, tremendous amount of popularity is because these are the stewards of the land who are drinking the same water that they're farming, are, tending to the land, are making sure that their systems are working responsibly. And you're seeing this change in that community where they're now open to new ideas, new agricultural practices because of a lot of these incentive-based programs that organizations like Farm Bureau have supported, and it's exciting. But as we talk about those cost impacts, that's why we have these incentive-based programs. The first thing that a farmer sees when he's thinking about, can I make my farm continue to survive, is what are my input costs? And Sarah said input costs are rising. Livestock feed, as we're hearing, questions about tariffs and impacts to potential agricultural inputs. Right now, I'll say all the bins for phosphorus and all of our inputs have already been purchased. Bins around the country are completely full. But things like canola meal, that's a byproduct that we get imported from Canada, which is a cheap protein that we feed to cows and hogs. Those types of things have an impact on what we're trying to do. So when we have regulatory processes or we have kind of new things that are lorded down onto farmers, their first thought is, how are these going to impact my yield ratios? How are these going to impact my farms? Are these going to increase costs on my individual farm? And if they start to say, you know what, all of these things are going to lead me to a spot where I'm not going to be able to continue, people don't quite realize what we're losing. One farmer in the state of Wisconsin feeds 166 people for a year. 1 in 9 jobs in the state of Wisconsin depends on agriculture to continue as a job in this state. So as we look and say, all right, yeah, it seems easy, just tell them that they have to do this. It's roles like mine to make sure that people know that we're representing farmers to say, well, hold on, let's see if there's a way that we can either find a mutual ground, come up with a win-win solution. These incentive-based programs have been very popular, making sure that we maintain that proprietary business information that could lead to competition stays out of the hands of people who will be using it for that purpose. Those are the types of things that we try to make sure that we're doing as an advocacy organization so that those programs run as smoothly as possible and maintain the sustainability of agriculture, which includes profitability for our farmers.
Brian, I want to come back to you and get the DNR's perspective on all this and ask, there's this, I think, historical stereotype, it's fair to say, that farmers are resistant to sustainability and environmental operations, and certainly Jason has outlined some ways that that is not the case. Are you seeing that from a regulatory perspective? Are you seeing sort of sustainable and innovative farming practices that are improving water quality?
Well, it's interesting how you mentioned an opportunity for the environmental groups to weigh into this, as well as farm associations. And government, especially at the state level, is kind of in the middle there. And I sit back here and I think we heard a lot about the science, best management practices, agricultural practices, technical standards, policy, regulations, law requirements, et cetera. And there's a myriad of opportunities and programs that are out there. Some are only contemplated. I'm sure Jason has more in his head, honestly. and there are just a mind-blowing number of opportunities or changes or opportunity for change. Yet we don't necessarily approach it in the same way. We haven't been. And our vision here is to try to get on the same page for at least a few items. What are some ways in which we can move forward together? Even if you asked people within the Department of Natural Resources, what is the best science? What are the best policies? We have 2,500 individual staff at the department. I bet there's going to be a really good conversation about what are the best sciences, best policies out there. What we started to do recently, a few years ago, is develop this Office of Agriculture and Water Quality at the department. And our goal here is threefold. One is to develop a communication venue within the department so that we understand the best science, so that we build the relationships within the agency. And do the same thing with our partners. The second deal here is working with our partners at other state agencies. It would be ideal, and it's achievable, that state government speaks from the same page here. Whether it's Discovery Farms, UW Extension, Department of Ag, Trade and Consumer Protection, et cetera. We need to get around the same science and identify what we agree upon, and those gaps in science as well. Same thing with policy. And that's where we need to work with the variety of stakeholders, from agriculture to environmental organizations. And that's what we really aim to do. Develop round 2 of this nutrient reduction strategy. That's something that you may have heard about being developed 10 years ago. And we characterized the variety of policies at that point. The policies in the state that, if fully implemented, would achieve water quality reduction goals. We haven't met that because we haven't implemented those programs and policies to the extent to which they were meant to be implemented. Just insufficient resources through federal and state budgeting. And so here we are talking about opportunities for change. We certainly have seen some great policy and have supported policy like producer-led groups, farmer-led groups. And we've seen those changes occur. There's nothing better than farmers learning from farmers, whether it's through innovative on-farm research or collaboration in a watershed. But those programs are geographically isolated. They naturally can't or currently don't extend everywhere. And so there's this patchwork, whether it's farmland preservation, ordinances that we had talked about earlier, as well as farmers that are engaged in farmer-to-farmer learning or farmer-led groups. Our job is to try to identify how to fill those gaps. And I think we can do that in collaboration. That's one big goal that we have, is try to work together and identify strategically how to leverage various programs and opportunities so that we fill those gaps as appropriate.
So you talked about, oh, go ahead, Sharon.
I was just going to say, from a legal perspective, I think we see a range. And so you want to amplify the people who are all doing the right thing and caring about the water quality. And then you want to have an opportunity to take enforcement to, if there are people who are maybe not following the rules, so that there's a level playing field and a little bit of an incentive.
What does the enforcement process look like? I assume there's some form of stepped or tiered enforcement that you take that starts with a conversation and ends with litigation.
Yeah, and Brian might want to talk a little bit more from the program perspective, but certainly the DNR's initial approach to any problem, whether that's a wetland fill or an agriculture issue or air problem, is to have a conversation with the person who we think might be not in compliance, to try and figure out if there's a path to get there. And oftentimes there is a path to get there. And then the path is taken and nothing else happens. It's only in those cases where we've tried and for one reason or another, the efforts at collaboration don't work, that we take civil action, or in some cases criminal action through our Department of Justice.
So Brian talked about resources and supporting some of these programs, and I'm curious, what's the best way to leverage incentives or financial support for farmers who adopt pollution control practices? And that can come from the state level. I know Governor Evers recently made an announcement of a big aid package for farmers, or from the federal level as well in some cases. So I'll throw that out to anyone who wants to address it.
Sure, I'll take a stab at that. I mean, one of the things that I think incentive-based programs are becoming incredibly popular, and they are helping to build relationships between departments, our farmers, the agricultural community, those producer-led groups. For example, this year, one of the things that we wanted to do is help build additional relationships and showcase some of the things that we're doing on the western side of the state. So we invited Deborah Shore, our EPA Region 5 administrator, to Wisconsin to showcase some of the things that we're doing in nitrate optimization and cover cropping, their cover crop rebate program, some of the things that our groups are doing. But in terms of resources, there will never be enough cost share dollars to make this fit. It's never going to be enough. You're always going to have producers that are going to say the cost does not meet the yield potential impacts. In some of the ways of nutrient management plans, farmers are actually going to get increased yields in a 1 to 2 year period. They're going to save money by doing more effective treatments like variable rate spraying, where you spray herbicides and fertilizers in areas where you only need it, energy efficient fertilizers, all sorts of different things. But we have to start thinking outside the box as a state, especially a heavy livestock state. So I go back to the Water Quality Trading Clearinghouse, which is kind of in its infancy, but we are the only state in the country that has a third-party clearinghouse that's helping to facilitate trades around the state. One of the challenges that I think that we've had in the early stages of getting this thing running was kind of a thought process of people thought that they were going to get baseline credits for their land practices, but really, and I'll admit this, the Clean Water Act requires that we meet that technical 590 standards before credit generation can be verified. So you have this, I'm a farmer, I'm only doing traditional farming practices, I haven't modified my farming practices in a significant way in over 20 years. Now I have this opportunity to take land and turn that into grass and alfalfa, or put gutters around my livestock or my feedlot, all of those types of things. But I'm only getting 50% of the opportunity, and that's actually what makes up the predominant share of the challenges that I think that we're having on water quality. It's that beneath the technical 590 standard. Nutrient management plan, even if adopted statewide, would only get us to that spot. So when we're talking about water quality trading, that 1.2 to 1 ratio minimum, so that's that ratio you're talking about, that's an additional benefit that we're getting. We're never going to be able to cost share that spot beneath there. I think there's a great opportunity to create non-compliance-based credits for agriculture for that low-hanging fruit that can have investment from a lot of our private organizations, the food companies that you're buying food from in the grocery store that want to be able to market that they have more sustainable practices, that they're using less water resources, that they're contributing to the farmers' bottom lines by improving the benefits that they can have. I think that this is something that's a truly innovative approach. Now, DNR, to pull something like that off, y'all are going to need some staff and a few more resources, which is going to be tough to go to the Republican legislature and ask for. But as we're talking to partners nationally, organizations like BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street are interested in this. And I mention those because they own like 90% of the portfolio of the S&P 500. And if you try to go to the grocery store and buy a food product that's not one of those 4 companies, good luck. But in all honesty, they're interested in improving the sustainability that we have. So trying to find resources from state and federal sources is important, but if you're looking at the lay of the land, you've got DOGE, which is axing things left and right throughout the country. For better or for worse, I won't make a political statement on that, but there's a sense that this administration at the federal level is going to be constricting the availability of federal funds, that you have a challenge with mixed with a legislature and a governor that are of opposite parties, so you're not going to have the impetus to increase in a significant way new programs that have to be written and funded, which can be line item vetoed or modified in certain ways. So you have really a constriction on our ability to come up with new and innovative solutions until there's a different government structure that might provide that. Now, I'm encouraged that there's a potential for a 5-year farm bill, but I don't know how much availability there's going to be for increased conservation funding in that process. And not having a 5-year farm bill has drastically hurt the agricultural community in a significant way. There's going to be a need for massive investments on the farm side of the farm bill. But leveraging private dollars, I think, is something that can provide additional resources, and using a third-party clearinghouse or private organizations like the producer-led groups, which mix both state, federal, and private dollar investments, I think is a way to help leverage more resources in this space, because it is palatable and consumers will find that attractive in buying those products.
Sarah, did you have something you wanted to add?
Well, I'd add to that we talk about resources in a couple of different ways, right? Financial and human. And so financial is what Jason was just talking about, which I fully agree that the food manufacturing and processing companies really need to get further and deeper into this incentive program game to be able to help their producers that are supplying that base inputs to their food production, that they're helping to cover some of those costs to be a more sustainable input to all the food that we eat. On the other side of that, though, however, is human resources that are necessary to implement the programs, both at the departments, at the ag and environmental organizations like ours and Farm Bureau even, working with our members to understand and work through these processes, but especially that local delivery of technical assistance. I really can't underscore how important it is to a farmer to be able to have a network to lean on to both understand how to incorporate and implement best management practices, nutrient management, all the 4 R's, that right place, right time, right method, right amount of manure or fertilizer, and really getting that dialed into their operation. Having done nutrient management planning with farmers for over a decade in my career, I recognize that challenge of overcoming the obstacles of implementation, both from just developing that plan first and foremost, understanding where there might be upside down on putting too much nutrients in one place and not enough in another. And to Dr. Skidmore's point, absolutely light bulb moments on a daily basis with those individuals. But then the next place is actually rolling those out into the fields. Every year, farmers are faced with new challenges from the weather that we might be experiencing, wetter, drier springs, falls. Those, they provide big obstacles to maybe fully implementing the nutrient management plan that was written for this crop year. So then being able to change on that dime and understand what practice changes they can make that still keep them within the boat of compliance, if you will, and making sure that that nutrient is staying in the fields as best as possible, not running off, not leaching to our groundwater. So that takes boots on the ground at the county level, at the land conservation departments, to really be able to support that. That takes agronomists who farmers rely on, really appreciating how conservation practices can and should be incorporated into just the daily rigor of farming. That's that social behavioral component that is really hard to put a number on, but really important to get right if we're going to have long-term systemic change that is going to propel our water quality improvement that we all desire.
You mentioned the importance of local input for farmers, and that's certainly a theme that I want to emphasize and expand on a little bit, especially in reaction to Dr. Skidmore's talk about local regulation and local ordinances. So I'll open this up to the group. Are there things local communities can do that really help, whether that is farming communities or environmental communities and citizen communities or county boards for that matter? What's the role of local input here?
All right, I'm gonna take it.
Yep.
So there's things that we can do that are really beneficial, and there's things that we can do that are incredibly harmful, and I think run counter to what our intended goal of is increased water quality. I'll start with things that are good. Increased relationships. One of the things that we've prioritized from the Ag Coalition and Farm Bureau is making sure that the counties do have the resources capable. We're supportive of increased county conservation staff funding. The governor, I think, actually shortchanged where they were last time. We would like them to maintain that funding and actually increase the amount of funding. From Farm Bureau's perspective, we're really encouraged about the relationships that we are building with the Land and Water Association. I was one of their speakers last year at their statewide conference. We had them come talk to Wisconsin Farm Bureau's Sustainability Committee. Yes, we have a Sustainability Committee of farmers. But we're also working this year to invite those county conservation staff to come to our Farm Bureau annual meetings at county farm bureaus all across the state so that we can facilitate and have a back and forth conversation. One of the things that I think has been challenging for farmers is that they have a hesitancy to reach out when looking for compliance assistance because they're concerned about the potential financial impacts of enforcement actions. For better or for worse, that's a reality that we have to contend with. And I think that Brian and the Office of Ag and Water Quality, I wish Jeffrey was here today too. He's a great resource, and Brian has been nothing more than absolutely accommodating to any requests that Farm Bureau has. There's a change in the tone and tenor that I think that DNR and some of our regulatory agencies are taking to try to work with farmers more, and I think that that's really beneficial. But for so many years, and I think Sarah would attest to this, it's been a very stick-first kind of relationship when we're talking about compliance assistance. Changing that tone and tenor so that the focus is on improving and maintaining compliance with requirements rather than an enforcement action that they're concerned about, whether that's perceived or in reality, is important. When we're talking about local ordinances, there are some things that are on here that I think we're, as an agricultural community, are fine with. The places where we start to see the wheels fall off is that when we're trying to do a manure storage or a operational agricultural ordinance, is the focus is trying to be on water quality, environmental improvements, but then there's all the other stuff. There's the permittee is now responsible for the financial costs associated with hiring experts, with filling out the permit, with all of the necessary costs associated with the county board for building the permit. Things like fire response plans being added into these things. Now, fire response plans sounds great on a base level, but what those really are trying to extend international building codes to livestock housing barns. Now, if you know anything about international building codes, those require fire sprinkler systems. Fire sprinkler systems require an absurd amount of maintenance, additional water resources, ongoing maintenance, and the installation of those can cost, for the size of the farms that we're talking about, into the millions of dollars. Biosecurity plans, these non-standardized plans that we in the agricultural community are pushing very much forward, don't have a statistical or standardized basis in law. So we don't know what the framework is to meet them. Additionally, open records request of proprietary business information remains a problem. When we hand over a nutrient management plan or our SNAP Plus data, SNAP Plus is the program that you use to do nutrient management planning. When we hand over that information, that's information that's very specific to that business. Someone can go and take that information, look at it, say, hey, he's land spreading in this, and find that contract. Again, those contracts of between landowners to be able to do manure spreading, have proprietary and financial information. Those can now become sticking points for competition between farmers or used as a way to tell somebody that somebody's doing something that they're not necessarily doing or allege that they're out of compliance without any influence from any of the people that you see on this panel who are actually the regulatory agency responsible with ensuring the compliance is capable. So if we're going to be doing things at the county and local levels to improve agricultural water quality, the ornaments that get hanged on to some of these ordinances are the sticking points that require an organization like a Farm Bureau to come in and say, we oppose this effort. And those aren't things that we necessarily want to do. We want to have collaborative things. We want our communities to know that our farmers are doing their homework. Things like DATCAP's checklist that I think Sarah was involved with early on at the producer-led program. Things that allow us to say, here's what we have. Tell us if there's something that you have a problem with, and we'll modify that and maintain compliance. And if there's ongoing checks that imply the compliance is being met without the sharing of proprietary business information, that's something that looks like a win-win for me. So, those costs associated, those challenges, there's really good work that's happening at the counties, but the problem is that there's other noise that's in that sphere, which is forcing us to say we have to take an adversarial approach that we don't necessarily want to take. And I think the solution to those types of situations is building those relationships, having those conversations up front before you go headstrong and get all the lawyers involved. Nobody wants to do that. Sorry, I know we're at MU Law School, but
lawyers. And I would say kind of the flip side, because Jason clearly is talking about some pros, and then his last part was a fair number of cons from what I think maybe he would view as over regulation at the county level. I think from DNR's perspective, one of the disadvantages to local regulation is that it can vary significantly. And so there are places where maybe we would all say the county's got it right, but then there's other places where counties aren't interested in playing a role at all, and that's problematic.
Yeah, you bring up, that's a good point. Additionally, that patchwork, the same way that you would go to your colleagues to say, hey, did I fill this out right, or I do this right? Farmers do the same thing. So when you have segmented regulation, that causes an additional problem with maintaining compliance, because what's in one county may not necessarily be in another.
I think that also, those points out a very obvious gap in that, what I see happening though is a lot of local communities trying to take action on their own accord because they're finding that the state requirements that would apply this blanket approach aren't sufficient from their perspective to protect themselves and the water quality of their area. So I feel that this, it's been boiling up and more over the last, decade to 15 years, I would say, which tells me that we maybe at the state level need to take another look at the state level, statewide regulations and requirements and incentive programs that we utilize to ensure that there is a little bit more consistent approach and protections in place to help overcome some of these issues that local communities are facing. So yes, I agree that there is a patchwork quilt of all types of programs that we offer. Farmland preservation is the biggest incentive-based program that we have to really provide an ongoing annual payment to farmers to have that nutrient management plan in place. It overcomes that economic burden of that practice on the regular every single year. So having the ability to apply that incentive program even at a broader statewide level would be huge and would provide a big leap forward for nutrient management planning and the benefits that come with it. So that, I would say that broadly though is the case. I mean, we wouldn't see this level of groundswell of interest and concern and further tightening of regulations if the statewide approach was fulfilling the needs of those communities in a better way.
I like to think about the opportunities for local communications and relationships as well. And I think about lake associations and watershed associations. Lake associations have been around in this state for a very long time. And now you overlay that with opportunities with farmer-led grant program and farmers that are being very innovative, open to change, and in collaboration with one another. Wouldn't it be great if they talked about some of the opportunities that they could achieve together? And they do. There are some of those examples. The Red Cedar River watershed area is one example. Peat and Well Castle Rock Association, they've come together with farmers in the area. And you know what works best is when they come up with a plan in collaboration on the front end. Not one person or one side saying, this is what you need to do. It's not a good look when one side tells the other side what they need to do. But these are opportunities that, on the front end, building those relationships at that local level, we've seen some really good opportunities. Again, it doesn't happen everywhere, so there are some backstops that need to be in place here, but we do see some good examples out there.
Yeah, one of my favorite ones I like to talk about is the Green Lake Lake Association. Green Lake, they're one of the deepest lakes in the state of Wisconsin, probably the furthest south that you can fish in an inland lake for lake trout. And if you ever caught a lake trout, it's an amazing experience. It's incredible fish. But they worked with the Green Lake County Farm Bureau to develop some kind of just a memorandum of understanding between that organization, the farmers in the area, and the Green Lake Lake Association to make sure that they're reducing phosphorus runoff, improving things. The homeowners who lived on Green Lake provided financial resources to the County Farm Bureau that they paired with things that the Green Lake County Conservation staff to help improve more best management practices, reduce runoff, and that's been a really positive relationship for an incredibly vital and critical resource in Green Lake, something so unique. And that's an example, a perfect example of a collaboration that I think we're very happy to talk about and excited to share and see if there's more opportunity.
You know, we've talked a lot about patchwork and some programs that work in some small areas or spatially they work really well. And then I really like how you framed it earlier, Jason, that, you know, we all need to have some influence on the change. We're not going to have sufficient resources alone through government. And society needs to change. Culture needs to change here. And when we have that sort of change where we demand on the consumer side of things that change occurs, that's a potential wide sweeping change that can be very influential in the long run. So it's something for us to think about. And how do we make that occur? How do we encourage that? How do we facilitate that? That's certainly on my mind.
I have a lot more questions I'd like to ask, but I want to give the audience an opportunity to get involved for a few minutes here. Any questions for the panel? And again, Hillary will be kind enough to walk around with the microphone.
Thank you. Is this on? Yeah. Thank you very much. This has been a really good conversation. And one of the things I really like that I'm hearing, and in my words, is to stop vilifying the farmer. We need them, especially in terms of climate change. 50, 100 years from now, where are we getting our food? We need to support our farmers. And it's not just water quality and infiltration and everything. It's where are we getting our food, especially in this area where we're right on the rural-urban divide. And so I see a lot of vilifying of our farmers where we really need to be supporting them because they are under a lot of pressure and they don't necessarily have the support network to support them for adoption. And so I really appreciate this conversation about developing a culture of conservation in the agricultural community and letting them really be the leaders on it. One of the other things that I'm coming across that is a disconnect is at the town board level. They actually have a lot of power over what goes on in terms of land use. And so I'm seeing this right at the rural, urban county divide where we have people on the town boards who don't understand farming because the farmers are no longer on those boards. And so what they're doing is they're changing the zoning from agriculture to rural residential and essentially wiping out the local ag community when we need them so much here, especially in the Milwaukee area adjacent to our metropolitan areas. So any feedback in regards to what can we be doing for town boards? And again, I can't agree more about the support for our county cons. So,
Thank you. Yeah. Any reaction?
Well, this is something I live every day. So in my role, just clarifying my role, I serve as kind of our chief government relations overlord. So we have a person on staff who does national policy, state policy, local policy. Also with us is Emily today, who does a lot of our administrative and political work. And what we're hearing is those types of things, and it's ones and twosies. There's 1,400 towns or 1,500 towns or 1,600 towns across the state that do have a lot of authority. And where I think the disconnect is that these towns see that agriculture does require a lot of resources. Modern agriculture, the reality is just that it's getting larger. Our equipment is getting heavier. You know, I'm sure if you asked a farmer what his favorite tractor is, he's not going to say the biggest one. He's going to say something smaller. But at the scales of economy that you need to be successful and profitable, you have to be fast, you have to be big, or at least looking to find bigger ways to do things. That's just the unfortunate reality. Do we want to be able to say small and unique and things like that? Sure. But they're concerned about road use plans. So they pass an ordinance under the authority that they have provided under NR 151, and then they hang ornaments on it to say, well, we have an increased problem with road use. Farm Bureau, we fully recognize that. We created a road program, the nation's first agriculture-specific road program, that takes into account the amount of road usage that comes from agriculture as a way to prioritize funding. We did a $150 million program. We just said, I mean, honestly, I'll be honest with everybody. We came up with it at the bar on the back of a napkin one day. It's Wisconsin, I feel comfortable saying that. But as this thing kept going, we identified that this was a real issue. That $150 million turned into 92 projects across the state that are now going to support upgraded roads that are taking roads that were posted that couldn't be driven on from an agricultural producer's perspective, that are now going to be no longer posted, are going to be able to handle the weight of modern agricultural equipment, and they're going to be transporting 15 million tons of goods across this state. That's a $12 billion economic impact from a $150 million investment in town roads. That works. So there's things that can be done. And when you mentioned rural residential versus A1, we're seeing that play out right here in Richfield. A growing community that's becoming a bedroom community for the city of Milwaukee, but has a very historic agricultural backbone, and a lot of our agricultural infrastructure that's required to be located close to farms are located in those type of communities that are nearby urban areas. The reason being, urban areas are where people eat. Everybody I know eats. So those types of things that are challenging. Sarah mentioned the farmland preservation program. I'd like to bolster that program so that we're further protecting farmland. There was a bill last year that said we don't want solar arrays, commercial solar arrays that aren't accessory use of the farms, to be able to claim the credits that are intended for farmers to protect farmland preservation. That bill was unfortunately vetoed by the governor, I think because of just a lack of understanding about what it does. But you know, we want to make sure that that preservation of that $12 to $15 million in farmland preservation tax credits are going to support preserving farmland. And I think that that program could probably use additional support so that those areas that are designated as A1, that are designated as farmland protected, are actually protected in a way that's similar to the old PACE program, the agricultural conservation easements. So I hear what you're saying, and finding a way to provide those resources to town boards from Farm Bureau through groups like the Towns Association is a priority for us.
Could anyone on the panel talk about the role of pollution remediation insurance in farm insurance in helping to negotiate the conflicts between what the farmer needs and what the community wants to protect?
There was an effort, this is going on 10 years ago perhaps, I guess, after a certain court case came out that labeled manure as a pollutant when it did in fact get into groundwater and impact somebody's neighboring well. At that point in time, the Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection did work to try to find an opportunity within the agricultural insurance arena to try to utilize that mechanism to incentivize nutrient management plans so that if a farmer developed a 590 nutrient management plan, checked all the boxes that are required for our federal standard, that therefore they would receive some type of insurance premium rebate reduction, kind of much like the cover crop rebate, but in this case for nutrient management. Unfortunately, we just got very few takers. Their interest level just wasn't there by agriculture themselves to undertake that effort. I think that's 10, 15 years ago, and a lot has changed, and a lot more visibility of agriculture operations and the potential for impacts that they can cause is on the rise, obviously, and a lot more in our public foray. So maybe there's an opportunity to relook at that as another option to pursue as another tool in the toolbox, another mechanism to try to incentivize more forethought and prevention action rather than the Band-Aid approach at the end.
I would imagine most of us in here coming to an event like this have very much a biases because we're either in a business of big business agriculture or perhaps we simply drink water, okay? The catch is in the details. For example, it sounds like a very common sense for a farmer to be concerned about the water that he's going to be drinking that comes in from a runoff of his cow's manure. The problem is that that's not the typical farmer in this country anymore, just as well as the local shoemaker or shoe repair guy is not the one that you see fixing your kids' shoes. The problem is where the corporate farms comes in, and all of a sudden, the people who are really creating the runoff by having 1,000 herd cows don't live on that farm. They might be living in Acapulco, for all I know. Yet, we all that not necessarily live at that farm have to drink the water that is contaminated with that manure. When you mentioned that there's 166 people that are being fed by every farmer, I don't dispute the number. I don't even have a clue what it might be. But maybe only 20 people should be living off of each of the farmers. And if we took those mega corporate farms that clearly have so much political power to overrule thousands of people living in a city drinking the undrinkable water just because they have the corporate money behind it, that might be where the problem is, rather than the things that we originally started with, telling the farmer, hey, listen, if you don't over-fertilize, I won't have to drink your cow's manure.
Thank you.
Because in
Thank
that
you for the
case, when
question.
you tell a farmer,
Jason, do you want to
use
respond to that?
use less, fertilizer and the right time and all of that is a win-win.
Mm-hmm. So a couple of things. I totally agree with you when you say maybe it should be 20 to 25 people. In 1960, it was 1 to 20. That's the time frame. How many people in here are farmers?
Yeah.
How many people in here work in agriculture?
Yeah,
There's not the workforce that's available to us to increase the number of farms. We're seeing a constriction in the agricultural workforce and an incentivized, probably based on federal policy in the Farm Bill, that's increasing the environment to consolidate. Again, part of this is a lifestyle issue. I say everybody in here probably likes going on a vacation. If you're a dairy farmer, you have to be at the farm 365 days a year, so you'll see 3 or 4 families that have been historic farmers combine with one another and say, maybe each of us can take a week vacation now. Now, in the state of Wisconsin, we might as well just have corporate farm laws because 98% of the farms here in the state are non-corporate farms. Even those large CAFOs have traditionally been multi-generational legacy farms that have grown over time and built up their book of business. We don't have the size farms that you're seeing in states like Arizona, Nebraska, Kansas, where you're having, quite honestly, 100,000 head. A massive farm here in the state of Wisconsin is a 5,000 cow dairy, and those are regulated by the DNR as point sources. In the state of Wisconsin, there's only about 350 CAFOs, but there are 6,000 dairies in this state. Now, I'll talk about one called the 699 Club. Those are the farms that are just about at CAFO status, but are just 1 or 2 animal units beneath. That's really the foundational model that's maintaining family farms at in this juncture. Cooperative networks are utilizing that structure to maintain, a lower cost to avoid potential regulatory impacts by saying, keep your farm below CAFO status, we'll keep taking your milk, you get a guaranteed price. There's a lot of benefits to being in a cooperative. You have a guaranteed place where your milk's gonna go, you're gonna get a fair price, you're gonna be able to lock in prices from time to time, you'll have added benefits from being able to source inputs more easily. But there's a structure in there that is challenging. The farm economy is a broken economy. Imagine right now if you just said, all right, I like agriculture, this is cool, I like what Jason's saying, he seems like a cool guy. Just kidding. But I want to start farming. Imagine trying to start a 200 cow dairy right now with the resources that young people have available at their disposal. Not only that, you're now a sole proprietor. You don't have access to an affordable healthcare system because you're now in an agricultural production. The way that your income is calculated on paper now kicks you out of the income subsidy limitations for the Affordable Care Act, and your variability in your inputs goes like this. So now you're in, you're out, you're in, you're out. There's not a consistent basis by which we're founding the inputs necessary to support agricultural producers coming onto the scenes. We don't even have a beginning farmer tax credit in this state. The technical assistance that a new farmer would require to get something up and running are estimated at between $1 and $2 million just to start a 60-cow dairy or a 100-cow cattle farm for beef production. It's very, very challenging. And then you have all of the technical expertise, all of the safety requirements, all of the upgrade facilities that you're doing. You don't have the foundation that we need in this state to get back to the 1960 level of being able to have 1 to 25 people being supported by one farmer. I'd love to get there. Hey, it'd make a lot more money for Farm Bureau if we had more farmers. But the reality is that unless we have a foundational change at the top of the ag economy, the way in which we're going is into larger consolidations, more multifamily farms. In addition, we need fixes on immigration reform. We need fixes on agricultural equipment requirements. I mean, there's so many things. This is such a multifaceted problem that we're dealing with that it's going to take a long time if we're going to reverse that ship and start bringing that number down. That is going to honestly require a lot of money. So I see what you're saying, and I think that that's where the impetus is that people hear about. But it's the kind of incentive that this economy and agriculture has created that isn't the fault of the farmers by any capacity.
And that's the problem everywhere in this country with every facets.
So
every single facet, whether it's industrial or personal life.
It's been a fascinating conversation. I thank you for your questions and your viewpoint. I just want to say a few things to wrap us up because we are at the end of our time together. First of all, what a stroke of luck to host this on National Ag Day. I had no idea. So that was purely coincidental, but I'll take full credit for it. So this brought us together in the same room today to talk about agriculture and water quality. And I hope it also brought us a little closer together in terms of viewpoint, given our mutual interest in Wisconsin's future by creating some relationships and future opportunities for collaboration and cooperation. So for all of us here at the law school, I want to thank Dr. Marin Skidmore, Cheryl Heilman, Sarah Walling, Brian Weigel, Jason Munyaini, our event staff, and of course all of you who came here today. We couldn't host programs like this if it wasn't for your interest. So please come back and see us again. Feel free to stay for a while and continue the conversation. Thank you again, and I hope to see you at programs in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.